Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dear distinguished guests, participants, Assalamu alaikum. On behalf of Comstech, I would like to welcome you all to today's event on launch of Proceedings, an international seminar on integrity in biomedical research. I would like to especially thank His Excellency Amar Abdullah Morsi, Counselor from the Embassy of Egypt, for being present here today. Professor Dr. Kaisar Abbas, Vice Chancellor, University of Sargodha, and His Excellency Professor Dr. Iqbal Chaudhry, Coordinator General Comstech. I would also like to thank our two speakers, Professor Dr. Khalid Said Khan, who is also a Comstech Distinguished Scholar, and Professor Yaqub Khalaf, President of UEARS Activities, to be present with us online, who would give their talks as the program goes forward. I would like to formally begin the program with recitation of the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان. الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان. والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان. صدق الله العظيم.
Now I would like to invite His Excellency Professor Dr. Muhammad Iqbal Chaudhry, Coordinator General Comstech, for his welcome address.
Excellency, young man, Amar Abdullah Morsi, the Counselor of the Embassy of Arab Republic of Egypt. Just a very short introduction, and that few words made me completely convinced that we have the right person as the chief guest, that he has not only been educated in most prestigious institution in Egypt and abroad, but also he served in UNESCO as representative of Egypt, as well as has worked on many committees related to research ethics, open science, whole range of different very pertinent issues related to research and its benefit to the common society. So thank you very much for coming. My dear brother, Professor Dr. Kaisar Abbas, a very distinguished academician, very high quality researcher, and also the Vice Chancellor of one of the most prestigious universities, University of Sargodha, a very fast-moving, progressive institution under his leadership, and a member of the Comstech Consortium of Excellence. Thank you very much for coming. All of you for your presence here in this very important ceremony of launching the proceeding of a very important event. Online, we have with us our two distinguished speakers, very dear brother, Professor Dr. Khalid Saeed Khan, who is a leading expert in the field of clinical sciences, biomedical research, bioethics, and number of other issues which are pertinent to research in general and biomedical research in particular. And he has been very passionately moving forward this mission of promoting high quality, high standard, high ethically approved research biomedical sciences, clinical trials in the Muslim world. And he has served as a resource person in many, many events which ComStech has organized in last several months. We also have with us dear young brother, Professor Yaqub Khalaf, the president of UARC Activities and co-convener of Cairo Consensus Group on Research Integrity, United Kingdom. So he actually is the real motivation behind the event, which was organized a year ago in Egypt, and in which my colleague Haris has participated along with the other distinguished fellows. So, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu and thank you for coming here. It was an intention that we should permanently archive the proceeding of high quality events which ComStech is organizing. So this is a mission in which we have decided that every event will have its proceeding recorded as archive, and in certain cases the proceeding of the proceeding book, which we are going to launch today. This event took place in Egypt. Egypt, as you know, is extremely important member of ComStech, the founding member of OIC, and a country which is not only a cradle of civilization, which is not only known for historical treasure, but the promise which Egypt holds for the Muslim world, with the highest number of research publications, the rise in number of publication of cited paper in Egypt is among the top in the world. Egyptian scholars have been contributing immensely in very large number of disciplines, including biomedical sciences and health sciences. And Egypt, with a very high quality research institution, universities, science park, is an example of excellence in education, in science and technology, agriculture sciences, and others. And Egypt can really be quoted as one of the best practices in the Muslim world. And we really value Egypt for its accomplishment and look forward to have Egyptian leadership for the rest of the Muslim world as one of the most proficient S&T country in the OIC region. Followed by this event, which took place in Egypt, we had a similar event which we have organized in International University, Islamic University in Uganda. And then there was an event here also. So there is a whole range of different events with the focus on developing ethical understanding, the understanding of the international protocols, understanding of the best practices, not only in clinical research, but also in general biomedical research. And this is what we are going to do today, as we will listen to our two speakers. And they would actually tell us how important this whole discipline is, and the entire paradigm of biomedical research is changing for good. And the Muslim countries are fast moving into it. The COVID has provided us to move into clinical trials. Many countries were able to do lots of very high quality research, which were not possible without a calamity of that magnitude. So it was in fact an opportunity because of that calamity. And certainly it is time for us to move forward in the best possible course of action. I would like to thank all of you today's speakers and also the speakers of the event on which this proceeding book is actually based. I'd like to thank the officials of UARC, comstech team, and all of you for your presence here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Up next, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Khalid Saeed Khan for his remarks. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for organizing this event and for making possible the consensus statement concerning biomedical research integrity that will be presented here and launched today. So I'd like to share my screen and the slides and would just like you to confirm if you are able to see my slides and that if you can also hear me well. Can somebody confirm that?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
All right. So in this case, let me then proceed. I give some of my affiliations here on this slide. The most important from today's perspective is my affiliation as a comstech scholar. And I would like to thank comstech for making possible the initiative that we are taking part in today. I'd like to say a few words about myself, give some orientation, then give some background as to what is clinical trial and its integrity, and then give a summary or overview of the Cairo consensus statement before concluding. So I started medical school in Karachi in Pakistan, then worked for some time in East Africa, returned to Pakistan, and at that time in 1990 had the opportunity to have my first paper published. I subsequently trained in research in Canada and then worked for nearly 2.5 decades in the UK. And during that time, I had the opportunity to work as journal editor, as well as have responsibility for research governance in a couple of institutions where I was a professor in the universities. And in 2020, just before the coronavirus was announced as a pandemic formally by the World Health Organization, I moved to University of Granada. By this time, I have taken part as a co-investigator in several trials listed here, the first one having been published in 1998, and over 13,000 participants have been included in the trials where I have taken part as co-investigator. So when we talk about biomedical research integrity, we typically tend to start by talking about the thalidomide disaster. We also talk about the syphilis experiments, which were unethical, and the US government subsequently offered a formal apology. But in COVID times, one would have thought that we overcome these deficits. Here is an example of a paper published in a top journal, New England Journal of Medicine, coming from a top institution. But within a few days of its publication, an expression of concern was issued, and subsequently this paper was retracted. And if we look at retraction as a measure of concern with respect to research integrity, Then here is a world map highlighting the issues concerning retraction. Over 200 papers concerning COVID have already been retracted, 6 of which are randomized controlled trials, according to the Retraction Watch database. And then there are surveys of researchers as to whether they themselves have engaged in or have observed others undertaking activities that may be considered questionable. And here from Holland, it appears that 1 in 12 have admitted to committing an error of a serious kind. And a systematic review of this topic has 18 studies, which on average shows that around 14% admit to or have observed data falsification, fabrication, or other form of alteration in research. This issue is not just now a scientific issue, it's also received media attention. Indeed, the news about the stepping down of Stanford University president from a couple of days ago is also linked to issues concerning failure of integrity in research over there. And to put it in perspective, here is a map of clinical studies being retracted from the literature. The darker colors from the USA and China, as you see, associated with higher numbers of retraction. And the comstech countries, states, are marked here in their borders with green color. So you can see that we are not immune from this type of problem. And the launch of the consensus statement today, hopefully, will be one of the first key steps in making change in the future. So what is a clinical trial? Research can commence in terms of subatomic, subcellular, cellular, and physiologic systems, but then it can include patients and societies. And this patient-centered research is the journey which ultimately will lead to, is part of the journey which will ultimately lead to health impact. So the transition from lab to health impact goes through various steps. And within these steps, talking about the terminology used in pharmacology, here we have phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the clinical trials. Phase 2 and 3 deploy randomized control design, and I'm going to say a few words about that shortly. But typically, the design is that groups of people are allocated to receive one or another form of intervention, and then they are followed up to see whether their outcomes improved as a result of intervention. And the queen of this type of research design is the phase 3 design, which is a definitive randomized controlled trial. These type of trials are multi-center, usually not, but more recently, we have seen in vaccination trials that these are multi-country trials covering countries in various continents. And it is these kind of trials that have brought about the change whereby today we are able to hold this meeting without having to wear a mask in the audience. However, just last week, the Nature magazine has published an article raising the question, how many clinical trials cannot be trusted? This is the issue of research integrity. The research integrity movement across the board, not just in biomedical research, but across the board, has been growing over the years. And a set of principles called Hong Kong principles have been put forward, which cover aspects including transparency, openness, diversity, and others as listed in this slide. But the bottom line is that ethics and responsible research conduct combined with mechanisms for governance in institutions allow for research to be undertaken in a way that when published, public can have confidence in its findings. The reality is that we can't just say this or that is important, and the rest is not so important. In fact, everything with respect to research is important because the impact of use of false findings is just unbelievable. So here is an example of what institutions should put in place with respect to trials, their monitoring, audits, and inspections. Good clinical practice is one of the cornerstones with respect to pharmaceutical trials. And if things go wrong, then perhaps observations are made in institutions that something isn't working correctly. And then at work, using concern at work policies, allegations of misconduct in research can be investigated. Subsequently, on completion of research, we submit research for review and publication in journals. And in this cycle, perhaps peer reviewers before publication may raise some concern about dishonesty, or post-publication, readers may raise concern about dishonesty. And as part of undertaking the work in leading to the Cairo consensus as supported by comstech, we discovered that many journals don't fully or explicitly provide instructions to authors with respect specifically to statistical analysis advice. They are also lacking in misconduct policies. And here we have an example of a webinar concerning problematic trials by one of the members of the group that produced the Cairo consensus, which shows an example of how dubious data can be discriminated by analysis from genuine data. So, despite all good intentions, there remains a proportion of research in clinical trials, in particular, that is dubious or problematic or has issues concerning integrity. And the idea is that we should capture and call this research and isolate it from the rest, which has integrity. And why should we wait until and after publication? We should set up mechanisms from the start that will nip the evil in the bud, avoiding for non-genuine dubious data to enter the circulation via publication. So I now would like to give some details of the Cairo consensus concerning integrity of clinical trials. The process we employed here to produce the statement is exactly the process we are recommending for randomized trials, for clinical trials, and then the same principles are generally applicable to other types of research designs in biomedicine. So we start with pre-registration. So we publicly declare what we are going to do. Then in the case of this consensus, we compose a panel undertake systematic reviews, collate the statements, seek the opinion formally of the consensus panel, finally hold a face-to-face hybrid online meeting. We share the data generated from this process publicly at the same time when we present the manuscript to a journal for peer review. We supply the preprint so it becomes publicly available for any comments to be made to the journal in the process of peer review. And finally, then this publication takes place. And thankfully, following publication, at least in an event in Uganda and another one now in Islamabad, we are able to promote the research integrity consensus under the comstech umbrella. So here is the open science framework registration of this consensus. And you will see from the date shown on this slide that it was December 2021, the 3rd of December 2021, when the plan for undertaking this consensus project was publicly announced and made available through this registry. At the Uganda meeting, indeed, various participants raised the point that comstech could take forward the idea of how to support registration, pre-registration of studies, and back them and provide the resources required to create such a platform like Open Science Forum. The public documentation and commitment to deliver the study is announced that anybody can check against this public record. Subsequently, we convene a panel of around 30 experts. We list all the expertise required in the process of a clinical trial, from its protocol development to its systematic review, subsequent publication, and use of that information in guidelines and policies. And the 30 experts cover the entire range of the life cycle of a randomized trial. These 30 experts don't just come from comstech countries, they also represent at least 14 countries in 6 continents, as shown on this map. The systematic review of the literature identifies 55 relevant articles from which statements are generated. The quality of this literature is also assessed so that the statements presented to experts are accompanied by a label of quality assessment. The initial step involves over 100 statements, both those generated through systematic review, as well as those provided by the members of the expert panel. These statements are put to the panel, and I'll show you how the responses were collated in a moment. But in over around 90% of response rate, with which statements are assessed in the first round of an electronic survey. Those that do not meet the consensus threshold move on to be presented in a second round, where further new statements are identified and also included. And the second round also has around a 90% response rate. And then finally, those statements that do not meet the consensus threshold are presented in a consensus meeting in February 2022. And ultimately, 88 statements concerning research integrity are consolidated in the Cairo consensus. And here is an example of a statement presented to the panel. And here you can see that there is quite a large number of participants who respond with their rating of strong agreement with the statement put here to them, if honest mistakes are identified post-publication, then an erratum should be published. In another case, there are some participants who disagree, for example, on the role of patient and public involvement in clinical trials. But the majority agree, and this type of statement passes forward into being included in the consolidated Cairo consensus. And here is an example where there is a substantial level of disagreement. And we are talking about the public documentation of the underlying trial materials during the entire study life cycle, starting from protocol development to patient recruitment, data collection outcome. And here you can see that the openness throughout the study life cycle, as required by this statement, does not enjoy the full agreement of the panel. And this is the type of statement that requires discussion in a face-to-face online hybrid meeting that took place in Cairo in February 22. So you can see that a project announced in December 21 went through 2 surveys of experts, and the findings of these surveys taken forward were presented in a face-to-face meeting, from which here we have the results statistically analyzed with respect to consensus achieved. And subsequent to the final face-to-face meeting, the data analyzed are made publicly available on the 29th of June, on the same day when the manuscript is submitted to the journal. So you can see that this project is practicing what it is going to preach through the consensus statement by sharing publicly the entire set of results obtained at each round of the survey, and the results of the survey analyzed, as the manuscript is also made publicly available as a preprint on the same date. And from here, you can also see that it is accepted on 3rd of March 2023. It takes about 9 months for the journal to take a final decision of acceptance. But during these 9 months, the manuscript and its findings remain publicly available via a preprint and the Open Science Forum platform. And in fact, the journal has the opportunity to receive comments made publicly, comments made through the public presentation of the material to be subsequently published. And you can see that over 1,000 views already took place ahead of acceptance by the journal. And the associated material in the systematic review published in the International Journal, and the statement itself published in the British Journal. And the statement contains these categories of recommendations, general statements as to how institutions and journals and funders should participate as a united force behind trials with integrity. What are the key elements of design and approval? Specifically, we're talking here about ethics approval and consent of individuals participating in trials, and then governance with respect to monitoring of trials, and finally, reporting of protocols and data in an open fashion, and publication, peer review, the responsibility of editors, and subsequently the responsibility of readers if they detect any concerns. And then what are the future research requirements? For example, the tests for checking research integrity should be validated. And this is recognized recently in the Science magazine publication just from a couple of weeks ago, where the need for validation of integrity tests being employed is highlighted. And then using these principles of integrity, a subsequent publication by the same group supported by Comstech has demonstrated as to how guidelines and underpinning evidence synthesis should incorporate the integrity principles in producing evidence synthesis that informed clinical practice and policy. So I simply ask you to examine what has been said with respect to clinical trials that transformed the health and public health scenario following the quarantine, making possible return to as normal as possible a life subsequent to the new disease coronavirus called COVID-19. Vaccination and treatment policies have been evaluated in trials. And then you can see that it is these trials conducted with integrity that have ultimately led to the freedoms we now are again able to enjoy following the restrictions we faced just around 3 years ago. So in summary, science is for the sake of society. The doubts about research integrity are shocking. They are truly shocking because you don't expect the likes of Harvard and Stanford to have retractions. And if that is happening over there, then obviously comstech countries are not immune to these type of problems. And it's it is the realization that we need to move forward in this direction that led for comstech to underpin the Cairo consensus that I have just presented. The idea is that studies that have problems should never see the light of the day. And this problem should be prevented from entering the circulation of the published science. The science must be ethical with governance, approvals, auditing, monitoring, and oversight ahead of presentation to journal editors. Informed consent here is key. The publication process should be transparent and open, where others have the opportunity to examine what trials have collected and presented. This scrutiny through open science should become the routine. There shouldn't be a black box there. And to summarize all this, prospective registration is key. Statistical analysis plan should be open. Data sharing is key. Transparency is key. Authenticity certifications may come from those who have responsibility for monitoring, oversight, and governance. And the reporting should be according to registration and the planned analysis. If we want integrity, here is a recommendation. We should stop the blame game. We should engage in educating researchers, in implementing policies that allow institutions to deliver the research integrity agenda that's coming forward through the Comstech-supported Cairo consensus statement, to do better research and to publish it with transparency. So with this, I thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any comment or questions that may arise based on my presentation.
Thank you so much, Professor Khalid, for such an insightful presentation. Do we have any questions here that we can take? Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khalid Saeed. I know a question while how we can implement the ethical approaches in our society. And the second aspect is how this honesty can be found out if the article is submitted to a journal, it is peer reviewed, and after the peer reviewed, it is retracted. So how this dishonesty can be justified?
Okay, so I apologize. I have not been able to pick up the question correctly at my end. Is the question that how can we ensure that the science we are going to use for policy and practice has integrity? Is that correct?
No, the question is the ethical approaches, how we can implement these ethical approaches, like we are dealing with the clinical trials. So how the clinical approaches can be implemented in all research culture in Pakistan or in Islamic world. How it can be implemented? What are the policies for that?
Once again, I apologize. I have not been able to pick up the question. Perhaps a colleague in the audience, perhaps even Professor Iqbal can comment on the issue raised.
Question is that he is talking about implementation of ethical approaches on clinical studies in our society, the implementation procedures.
Can you hear us, Professor Khalid?
Yes, I can. So please go ahead if there is a further comment or question.
I think we will move on to the next
Okay.
speaker. Thank you so much, Professor Khalid, for your presentation. If there are any queries, any comments, I will compile them and share them with you over the email for you to answer, sir. Next, I would like to invite Professor Yaqub Khalaf, President of UEARS Activities and co-convener of Cairo Consensus Group on Research Integrity, for his talk on research integrity from Islamic perspectives, challenges and opportunities. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to be in this important meeting. And thanks to colleagues who have invited me to this symposium. I think in the current time, for any practicing clinician who deals with medicine and deals with patients, there is nothing more important than ensuring that what we prescribe for our patient, what procedure we do for them, is really founded on proper research that is not spun, not massaged to suit any other end than serving the patient on evidence-based ground. Now, I chose to make my contribution having a look inwards into us as Islamic society and Islamic countries by the composition of comstech. I'm grateful for the invitation once again. There is no doubt, and I'm sure you agree with me, that Islam opened the door for research. And as it is said in the Quran in so many occasions, and follow not, i.e. say not and do not and witness not, that of which you have no knowledge. And that it says in Arabic, وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ, meaning you always try to seek knowledge so that you can follow and you can witness and you can advise on what is founded. The same in hadith of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, it says that every disease appears to have some cure that is created by Allah, and it is our duty to be exploring avenues to reach that cure, but on ethical grounds. And Islam in general will appreciate and recognize those who do the job properly. Whoever fulfills his commitment and fears Allah, then indeed Allah loves those who fear him. And that is a verse in the Quran. And we have a career we have history that is unmatched, because when everybody else was doing a guesswork, the Islamic scholar, and most notable of them is Ibn Sina or Avicenna, about 1,000 years, he was introducing to the world almost as it is being called kanun or law for practicing medicine. And that was not a casual job. That was a proper job that kept its validity for centuries. And it has been translated into most Western universities and has been translated into different languages and has been in practice until the 18th century or even beyond. So with this responsibility, historical responsibility, puts extra onus on us as Islamic countries or Islamic researchers really to be up to that level of pioneering work in what we call now evidence-based practice. So talking about research integrity, it is something that unfortunately has become hazy and nebulous over the years in the zeal of the scientific society to publish without sometimes paying attention to quality or integrity. We all agree that integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching. And that is also an Islamic principle called ihsan, where you worship Allah as if you see him. And if you don't see him, he sees you. So integrity in it, at its best, is enshrined into our religious beliefs. So when it comes to research integrity, it is about the performance of research to the highest standards of professionalism and rigor in an ethically robust manner. And every word of this has really meaning and has importance, and it should be encompassed in our approach to research. Conversely, research misconduct is what happens when these standards are not, if integrity and ethics are not adhered to or abused. And sometimes it goes to the extreme, where we could be faced with trials that are published that are totally fake. And that brings me to talking about the degrees of research misconduct. It be fabricated, totally made up. It could be falsified, where you manipulate research by using different processes and misrepresenting data and results. It could be plagiarism, where you are doing patchwork by taking somebody else's work without citing. Research integrity is all about trust. And that is very, very important principle, because the society expects us or expect to be able to trust us with whatever science we produce or introduce. And if that trust is lost because we decided to stray from the expectation, then we have let ourselves down, we have let the society down, and we've let our patient down. And if we are seen as just another professional group that are doing whatever it takes to advance our careers, and that work is not necessarily reliable, this is damaging to all the society over and above our own reputation as a professional that is usually expected to be honorable. Research misconduct is what happens when the standards of integrity and ethics are ignored or abused, as I mentioned earlier. So what is the current situation? Professor Khaled Khan has alluded to the most recent reflection of the current state of affairs when it comes to research conduct. It is clear that the incidence of research misconduct, as tracked by official statistics and surveys and analysis of retracted paper, are all on the increase, which really very, very disappointing. As we are meant to be progressing with science, we seem to have forgotten to progress with integrity and with ethics. And that is reflected in that recent publication in Nature, really raising that very important question that how many clinical trials can't be trusted. And that is pertinent because sadly on our day-to-day observation and practice, there are so many papers and publications that are not worth the paper they have been written on. and they advance misinformation and advance mispractice and malpractice, and it is driven by other motives than serving patients. We don't want to paint a gloomy picture. Research misconduct is unusual, but it's not rare. And it is shared in every community, whether it is in the Islamic world, the non-Islamic world, the West, the East. It is, unfortunately, there will be element of that. So what are the driver of research misconduct? We all agree that in every society there will be bad apples. And those are the ones who would have very loose or relaxed ethical principle or lack thereof, where they don't resist the temptation to do what is wrong rather than doing what is good. But in general, as a principle, how honesty works depending on the structure of our daily environment. If our daily environment can live with fraud and with cheating and with falsification and fabrication, then we are doomed. But if our society has standard and make sure that this standard is adhered to by having zero tolerance of this kind of crime, I call any fraud in science or in medicine is a crime, and we should be tough on this crime and on the causes that lead to the crime. If we give a blind eye, we are getting nowhere. But if we have a policy to recognize this and deal with this comprehensively, we will be making the right move. When we ask ourselves, why do we do research? The party line, or officially, we explore new ideas and develop novel solutions and prove their work and solve unsolved problems. But when you really reduce it to its component in real life, people do most of the time research to publish paper and attract funding, create new system and solution, enhance our CVs, and we go on to the ladder of getting a better job, secure academic or industry job, and maybe doing it for totally the wrong reason, to just show people how good we are. Serious research is expensive, and that is an important fact. It requires significant and sustained investment in resources. In actual fact, that's one of the clues. If you find a paper being published by an investigator or two together that claims to have studied big subject on large number of patients, and it was done within 6 months and published in the following 6 months, don't read it. That is not worthy of reading, because it can't be a half-baked job. Serious research takes time and takes money. And it needs access to information, it needs facilities, and it needs equipment, and it needs technical and admin support. If we have closer look at our Islamic world, where it fares with this, unfortunately, there are some challenges which mainly revolve around lack of funds, lack of scientific leadership, the brain drain, because when people don't find the right environment, they go wherever the good environment is. Lack of dedicated young scientists. People are more preoccupied by making a living than having dedicated time to do proper research, and lack of facilities. And in some countries, government change very frequently. They have emphasis on the here and now rather than thinking about the future. So those who have a practical, and even those who have practical approach to research are not provided with a suitable environment to thrive and to contribute to the. When we look at the gross domestic product, or the so-called GDP of different countries, you will find the first 10 countries, as far as spending on research, none of them is one of the Islamic countries, despite the increased fund and everything. The second one, which is from 11 to 20 countries in the world, and this data is 2022, none of them is a Muslim country. And you can see the variation in spending. Even from 30 to 40, you find that Egypt has appeared. In the previous one, there was Turkey as number 15, and there is not a lot, really. Even when people have the money, they are coming late in the ranking of spending on research. And that does not allow the right consideration of research and its importance to take hold in the society and help advancing in what matters. And if you don't believe the impact of the previous figures, just I gave you an example from the Organization of Islamic Cooperation when they did a joint venture to see what kind of research and investment in research on cancer, which is no mean issue. It is to do with the most serious disease and illness that is life-threatening. For the sake of time, the conclusion of this found that cancer is seriously under-researched in most of this Organization of Islamic Cooperation countries. This will undermine the ability of these countries and the whole cooperation in general as a whole to deliver on better cancer control for their population. And it advocated new balance, new policies and leadership and funding are urgently needed to address this situation. So we have a lot of homework to do in order to move things in the right direction, or as we like to see them. So we know that research is expensive, but if you think research is too expensive, try disease. And that is not, again, a mean feat. And nothing is more expensive than a wasted opportunity. We have the need, we have the manpower, we have people who are just willing to be given a chance, but we just need to provide some way of utilizing these opportunities. When it comes to our initiative, which Khaled detailed to you, we felt that we cannot sit idle and do nothing as far as the Upper Egypt Assisted Reproduction Society and comstech joined together. We engaged in that consensus statement that Khaled details. And the whole aim really is to foster integrity in research culture, where everybody knows what is integrity and what is deviation from integrity could lead to. We advance, people attempt to get educated, and get educated not just on how to conduct research, but how to conduct research ethically. And in this context, I have here Professor Mahmoud Fathallah, who's well-renowned scientist and clinician and worked for the WHO, for the United Nations Fund, and has produced this simple available document for young researchers to give them the ethical, the technical, the clinical principle of conducting clinical research. And our initiative of the consensus statement that Khaled shared with you goes some way to addressing the important issues. And also, we need to not be worried or afraid about approaching fraud, because it does exist and it needs to be exposed. Here is a paper published maybe 10 years ago talking about fraud in red. And it is on the increase, sadly. And it is, like I mentioned earlier, not restricted to one region or one country or one continent. It is global. And people who engage in fraud, they will start by rationalization of what they do. If they have a theory or reasoning, they consider it sound, the data is wrong and skewed, they rationalize it, they have a motive to publish or perish, or they would like to have promotion, and they control the data and they can easily change them to suit their need. And that is the so-called fraud triangle. However, it is enough for us to be talking about what can go wrong. How can we make it better? We need to stop the unrealistic expectation placed on our researchers in our countries. If we can't provide them with adequate resources, we need to be practical about it. Don't put too much expectation on them when they don't have the tools or the facilities, because you are almost driving them to relax research conduct. We need to reevaluate the requirement for academic promotion, particularly when we ask for international publications, when the structure and the facilities that we are offering does not really allow for something meaningful that you can publish internationally with pride and with integrity. Adequate research governance need to be in place, because researchers, if they left to their own devices, they could stray. But if they know that they are monitored and what they do is supported and guided, probably things will go in the right direction. If we have clear expectations, if we also have penalties or sanctions on those who engage into publication of questionable integrity, or their publication be retracted. And we must provide local provisional peer review of what we intend to publish internationally before it is being published. It will be a deterrent. And applying the recently published criteria to assess integrity of research, because it is becoming increasingly published. And we should always have fraud alert. It is a sad state of affair, but now it is fair to say, whenever you read a randomized control trial, take it as this is questionable until you are assured otherwise. That is the world that we live in. So, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, from my reading and my day-to-day experience with research integrity and what happens in our field, where people are committing this because of commercial interest, intellectual interest, lack of knowledge, lack of support, a bit of pressure, none of this is an excuse. Because clinical research is important. It touches patient life. If we put a doubtful research and then include it in the systematic review, it could sway the result in the wrong direction to the harm of patients. Good clinical research skills are acquired. They can be trained. So people can be trained, but they should not cut corners in getting the right training. Research training and resources are essential. Research planning and monitoring are important, and peer review is extremely helpful, and cutting corner will undermine research quality and can lead to the ultimate worst scenario of people committing fraud or fabricating studies. And research under pressure also is not a good idea. And I hope that this initiative, this meeting and other meeting and future meeting will seek to raise awareness of how important good research and good research conduct and integrity in research are important. Just as we do surgery to cure patients, we need to do with the same meticulousness and attention to detail, adopt the same thing when we do research. Ladies and gentlemen, some people do research assuming that the end justifies the means. In medical practice, in medical ethics, the end should not justify the means. The end must be honorable, just as the means should be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Yaqub, for such an excellent presentation. Now, I would like to invite our chief guest for the event, Excellency Consular Embassy of Arab Republic of Egypt, Mr. Amr Abdullah Morsi, for his remarks. Please, sir.
Thank you. Professor Iqbal, distinguished professors, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to be with you today in the launching of Proceedings of the International Workshop on Integrity in Biomedical Research that we had the honor and privilege of hosting it in Egypt earlier this year as a part of the distinguished committee activities in the region. I would like to start my presentation or my speech by thanking Professor Iqbal for the nice words regarding me and regarding my country. I just came here like 3 weeks ago, and you have overwhelmed me with lots of love and friendship here in Pakistan. We have lots of similarities between our countries, and I hope I'm going to have a good post here with lots of friends and colleagues. I would like also to extend my appreciation and thanking to Professor Khan and Professor Yaqub for the informative and comprehensive presentations. And I'm glad to see lots of young people here interested in scientific research in the period where everybody wants to be YouTuber and TikToker. And so like my admiration to you. Thank you so much for being here. You are the real influencers. As Dr. Iqbal said before, I used to work in UNESCO for 5 years. I was the delegate of Egypt So I got acquainted to the international scientific cooperation, and I was the witness of a general appetite of strengthening the international cooperation in science through the formulation of different international normative instruments, like recommendations in the ethical dimension of artificial intelligence. Also, I worked with the OECD on the same recommendation for artificial intelligence. I was the rapporteur of the recommendation on open science that we adopted like 2 years ago. So I feel that there is this kind of appetite that we should use. These documents, in my opinion, should serve as a reference to our national authorities to deal with the new global challenges. We politicians, diplomats, we try to reach in those documents the maximum level of consensus, but sometimes we cannot include everything because we have different opinions from different countries. But you researchers, you give soul to those documents, and you can enlarge your scope, make them livable and applicable in real life. So that's very important. So like we do our role, you have the document, but after that, when it comes to application, you are the real conductors of these. I don't want to repeat the traditional normal slogans that we need to reinforce international cooperation. No country by alone can face all the global challenges, but this is the reality. I mean, we need international human solidarity. We need cohesion. And most importantly, we need a common understanding of the challenges, the difficulties that we are facing, so we can reinforce our capacities to reinforce them. AI, technology, synthetic biology, among other fields, offer huge potential, but at the same time pose serious challenges. The exercise of drafting a specific recommendation for scientific integrity is a very important tool, seriously. And Cairo consensus that was mentioned by our professors is a very important tool for our countries and can constitute a reference for our research. Honest reporting, dissemination of reliable information, code adherence, ensuring that research is conducted according to appropriate legal, ethical, professional frameworks, obligations, and standards are all prerequisite factors for an efficient biomedical research process, but actually in any kind of research that can lead to benefit of humankind. Before I conclude, I would like to reiterate my appreciation for, and as well as the appreciation of my country, of course, for the important role played by the comstech in enhancing cooperation among OIC countries in the fields of science and technology. And I hope that this exercise can serve as a platform of cooperation to enhance the governance of scientific process, exchange of best practices, and support for the development of researchers. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your remarks. I will request Professor Iqbal to present the proceedings. Thank you so much, sir. With that, I would like to thank once again to Excellency Counselor for being here today, to our online speakers, Professor Khaled, Professor Yaqub, for taking out the time. And with that, I would invite you all for a group photo and lunch on the ground floor in the foyer. Please, sir.